Hello everyone, welcome back once again to Lessons from the Table. I seriously need a haircut and I've been really busy, so this upload schedule completely fell off. Hopefully now I can get some videos up a little bit more consistently. So the first thing I want to talk about, this is what this video is going to be about. Now you're going to see me wearing the same shirt for a couple of videos because I'm just going to record a whole bunch in a row right now. In my very first episode, I mentioned balance, and I said I'll talk more about it later. So this is later. So the concept of balance in D&D, I think, is a bit of a hairy one, because everyone comes at it from a different perspective. But the most common one that people come at it from is video games. And people could be forgiven for that, right? Like, let's be real. There is a huge crossover between the sort of person that is likely to pick up a tabletop RPG like D&D and someone who has maybe played some other kind of RPG on a computer, or indeed any kind of game. Let's not limit ourselves to RPGs. In fact, I'd say it's the video games that aren't RPGs that give people the wrong ideas about balance in Dungeons and Dragons. So in the first episode I discussed all classes are equal. So now I want to look at that from the balance side. I had a really interesting conversation with one of my players actually just last week as I was dropping him off, and this is kind of what has pushed me over the edge to make this video now. We were driving to his, and we mentioned like doing a PvP sort of thing, and he went, I've never actually thought what class would be best in PvP. Now that's quite interesting. The reason I find that interesting is people talk about what classes are really great and maybe better than others and what classes feel weak and all sorts of stuff, and I think there is a little bit of merit to that argument. I'm going to be completely honest. On paper, paladins get a lot of really useful stuff. When you compare that to rangers, yeah, there is a bit of a disparity there. Let's be completely honest. But the thing I found interesting was that my player, who himself is an avid gamer, hadn't thought about what it would be like to actually do PvP at the table. Building your class like you were going to make a WoW character to go up against other real players who had their own builds. Now that says something very interesting. That tells me that my players don't think about making a character for D&D the same way they think about making a character for a PvP game. When you're making a character for a PvP video game, you really do need to think about balance. Let's be completely honest. It is very hard for game developers to balance those sorts of games. There is a lot going on. It is extremely complex. And you as a player, if you really want to go full on top with that, if you want to be the best, you've got to have a really highly well-tuned character. There are going to be some things you just straight up can't play if you really want to be the best. That is not true in D&D. There is absolutely nothing you cannot play. There is no situation where you will go, well, there's no point playing a ranger because even though I want to play that, it's not going to do well enough in game and it's not worth it. I should just play a paladin. I don't know, maybe I'll reflavor them to be some kind of, nature survivalist. Now, for what it's worth, if you want to reflavor a paladin as a nature survivalist, all power to you. That sounds like a really cool character concept. What I mean is, you would do that because of the character concept, not because rangers aren't good enough. Not because there's no point playing a ranger. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. People still play rangers. Even when you look at, what classes are more and less played, there is a bit of difference between the classes, but often a lot of it comes down to what's accessible. I think one of the most played archetypes in all of D&D, or not archetypes, rather subclasses in all of D&D, with the Adventurers League statistics, is the Champion Fighter. You know why? Because it's easy as sin to play. And that's nothing against anyone who wants to play one, because they can be a ton of fun. In fact, I have a player who recently rolled one up going, well, I don't really care too much about the combat mechanics. Here's this interesting character. This is how I'm going to roleplay them. I don't want to have to think about the combat at all. I've got a guy playing a barbarian who's doing very much the same. In combat, he gives himself advantage. He grapples an enemy and he keeps them pinned for his allies to do stuff. Out of combat, totally different kind of guy. Really, really interesting. So this isn't to say, oh, Champion Fighter is easy, yada, yada, yada. My point comes down to people don't think about D&D in the same way that they think about making characters in PvP video games, or even picking characters. Like, look at something like a MOBA, like Dota or League of Legends. You know, there are characters that you should not realistically pick because they're just not very good right now. You're not even building your own personal character. It's not an RPG, but that mentality still pervades the majority of PvP and competitive gaming. When that gets carried into D&D, it breaks apart very quickly. And I do think there are a lot of DMs who have to address misgivings that their players have, that they carry in from video games. I've certainly got a player who I have to talk a lot with about that. But balance, it doesn't come up often, but it's still something you really need to get out of your head if it ends up being there. There is no such thing as balance in D&D. There is no such thing as this class is inherently stronger than another, therefore this other one isn't playable. But when we're talking realistically, like I said, you could say, flat out on paper, maybe a ranger is a bit weaker than a paladin, if you really wanted to crunch the numbers and look it all up. I mean, don't, because that's a waste of time. There's too many variables. But what you can do, and indeed what you should do, is look at the experience of play at your table. This is where balance really does mean something. I had a very interesting conversation recently. I include some homebrew in my games. One of my current homebrews is a very specific warlock patron that allows you to essentially turn yourself into a kind of ranged combatant. You get a whole bunch of really interesting abilities, but using them all requires you to forego spells. There's a lot of invocation tax. And I think there is an argument for quote-unquote balance in homebrew, but there's also an argument to disregard it altogether, especially when you're making it for your own table. So we're testing this thing out. And this character was dealing a decent bit more damage than everyone else. We looked into why. It was because of the feat Sharpshooter. And I had another player remark, I don't think that your homebrew is unbalanced. I actually think it's just Sharpshooter in this situation is a bit too strong. And even then, it's not that it's too strong. It is definitely one of the stronger feats you can take. It's just that no one else at the table had anything comparable at that point in time. So I, as a DM, have to fix that. That's my job. My job isn't to go and change the game. My job isn't to say you can't take Sharpshooter. I can do that if I want, by the way. But if a character is doing more damage than others, and there's nothing particularly like out of whack with the build or with the class or anything that they're doing or using, it's up to me to address that. Or if someone is really lagging behind in how much damage they're doing, it's up to me to fix that. Maybe they find a magical weapon. That's one of the easiest ways to fix it, right? Okay, this player is just dealing less on their damage. They find a +2 weapon. Cool, right? Like, you have those sorts of tools available. So this is where balance does apply. The experiential balance at your table is important. And it's also very important to discern the difference between real balance and perceived balance at your table. Because here's the thing, oftentimes players will only notice one area where they're feeling a little bit underpowered, and not necessarily spot the area where they're actually leaps and bounds ahead of the party, right? I mean, a classic example of this is someone who does a lot of roleplay and is good at being a party face. Let's say you're playing a bard, and you've picked a bunch of weird spells all across the board. You haven't really gone too hard out on, like, this is the ideal thing to take in this situation. Let's say you've taken spells that just kind of fit thematically with your backstory, which, by the way, I think is a great thing to do. I don't think you necessarily have to do that, but I like it when players do that. Let's say you've done that. In combat, the wizard who's gone all out on like really min-maxing their damage output is totally outdamaging you, the bard. And that kind of sucks. Every time combat gets rolled, you're sitting there like, I just feel like I don't have much of an impact. Now, luckily with a spellcaster, you do get to change your spells a bit as you progress, but what the bard probably hasn't realized is, out of combat, because they're a bard, they do exceptionally well on skill checks, especially the charisma ones. The wizard barely gets a chance to talk. If he does, the negotiations get botched. If the party wants to succeed out of combat when they're talking to shopkeepers, mayors, bandits, anyone, the bard does the talking because he's the most likely to succeed, and the wizard sits there going, I just feel like I don't really have any impact out of combat. But the bard's probably not aware of that. So when the bard comes to you and says, yeah, I feel like in combat, just on the damage side of things, I'm not really enjoying it. I feel like I have no impact. What you need to do is say, well, combat's not everything. Do keep in mind your character, being kind of the face of the party right now, navigates through a lot of the out-of-combat situations, does a lot of the talking, does most of the persuasion and deception checks in the party. In fact, between you and the paladin, really no one else is doing much talking to NPCs. And I'm not saying that's a problem, but, you've got your strengths, you've got your weaknesses, much like the others. That wizard, yeah, I know he's out damaging you in combat, but he doesn't get to do much out of combat. He doesn't have a lot going for him right now. And if that bothers him, he might change his spells later on down the line. You can do the same. If the bard is insistent, and if the bard has a real issue with some of the spells they've taken, and there's too many in there to replace because you only get to swap one up per level, maybe let him swap a couple. You can do that. There's nothing stopping you. And if it's going to make your player enjoy themselves a bit more, yeah, go for it. Heck, if you really feel like you need to, let them swap them all out. It's not going to kill you. So that's where balance does apply at your table as a DM, and it's something you need to be very keenly aware of. It can be hard to get an idea of what your player's experience is during gameplay, especially if they're not telling you. Because even when they are telling you, they're only going to tell you a part of it. It's, red traffic lights. You don't notice the green ones because nothing changes. The red ones, you've got to stop, you've got to slow down for, and it feels bad. When you're in combat and everyone else is out damaging you and you feel like you're barely keeping up, it feels bad. But you don't notice how little everyone else is able to talk or interact outside of combat at times. So this is what I mean by balance. And I think it is very easy, especially if you read a lot online, because the point of the series, I think, is to take a look at the experience of DMs who consume a lot of media but still end up having failings in their games. I'm trying to address those sorts of things. If you're that sort of DM and you've looked at all the stuff online, you read all the subreddits and everything, you could be fooled into thinking that some classes are just straight better than others. Man, the amount of time people complain about Hexblade Warlocks, and look, I'm going to be completely honest, yeah, if you really go hard out, if you min-max that build, you can out-damage a lot of things. Is that broken? I don't think so. If I've got a Hexblade Warlock at my table that really min-maxes the hell out of that build, and they get to do a ton of damage, and they feel great, they're like, yeah, awesome, I'm having a good time. My other players are like, yeah, I feel like I don't really keep up. I'll give them a magical item. I'll give them something that helps them keep up in combat. You do have to be a little bit careful about it. You don't want to suddenly have all these magical things that these other party members are getting, have them outdo that Hexblade Warlock. And you should also probably give the Hexblade Warlock some other items, some things, maybe magical trinkets, not necessarily in combat, but out of combat applications, so that they also don't sit there going, well, I'm doing this well because I built for it. The rest of you are just, getting bumped up with all these items, and I'm getting no items. I'm getting nothing. That feels bad. But you can navigate yourself around that. They can still feel satisfied. They're like, yeah, in combat, I've got this awesome build. I do so much damage. That's exactly what I wanted out of playing this character. And everyone else, well, you've given them, a couple little things here and there to help boost up their damage. Maybe someone's got a gem that can cast haste once per day. And now the fighter feels like he's really having a big impact in combat. Or the barbarian, or the rogue. And suddenly, everyone else is enjoying themselves without diminishing the experience of that player who rolled up their Hexblade Warlock. So when you see people going, man, Hexblade Warlocks are so busted, I cannot understand for the life of me people who get up in arms at Wizards of the Coast about stuff like this. Because you can address it at your table. And just because that's possible with that character, or rather with that class and subclass, doesn't mean it's mandatory. It doesn't mean it's the only way to play it. It doesn't mean it's the only way that people are playing it. Most people aren't. Most people are not playing Hexblade Warlocks like that. And some are, don't get me wrong. I guarantee a statistically significant number of people are. And if one of those people is at your table, you've got tools to address that. What's the problem? Don't believe everything you read, right? Like, just because there is a consensus online that says this is powerful, this is weak, this is worth playing, this is not, doesn't mean you should sit down before gameplay and go, right, I'm banning Hexblade Warlock. I recommend you don't play Beastmaster Ranger because it's a bit too weak. You should play a different kind of Ranger subclass. Do this, don't do that, banning this, don't take this feat. Here's, all that kind of stuff. Man, what a waste of time. Let people play what they want to play and react after the fact. One person's out damaging everyone else, find a way to bring everyone else up. If one person's really lagging behind in damage or RP abilities or navigational abilities or what have you, help bump that up too. The most important thing is that each player is able to live out whatever character fantasy they have. Now, when I say that, what I mean is, why did they make that character? Because for some people, they don't really give a rat's about the RP. They're the Hexblade Warlock that has min-maxed the build and they just want to do tons of damage in combat. That's why they're playing the game. That's why they made that character. And some people are sitting there, they want to be a huntress with a pet bear. So they pick Beastmaster Ranger. What's most important is that they feel like they are playing this cool, mysterious huntress with a pet fucking bear. If you can achieve that, you have pleased both of those players. Even though, if you read and believe everything that is out there online and what is apparently the group consensus, only one of those players should be having fun. React to your table. Balance around what is happening, not what people's opinions of the game itself are. You're going to get a much better experience for all of your players and also for yourself. The happier your players are, the easier things are for you. So that is what I'm talking about when I talk about balance in Dungeons & Dragons. There is no such thing as true comparative balance between each and every class because they are inherently designed to have areas where ones shine and others do not. But there is balance between your players during play at the table. Pay close attention to that, because if you can really get on top of that balance, you can have a great game. That's it for this episode of Lessons from the Table. Like I said, you're going to see me wearing this exact same shirt for quite a few of them, because I'm about to record a whole bunch more of these. See you next one.